3:17 a.m. My phone lit the bedroom with a fraud alert about the $30,000 draw on a home equity line I didn't know we had. 10 minutes later I was staring at the PDF on my banking app with my name looped in a signature that wasn't mine, and a timestamp showing it was authorized from a device registered to our Wi-Fi. The glow from the screen painted the ceiling like a warning flare, and I understood that the thing I'd been skirting around for months had crossed into something official and irreversible. I live on Munja Hill in Portland, Maine, in a narrow duplex that leans a bit toward the back cove like it's listening. My wife, Lena, is an ICU nurse at Mercy with a swing schedule and an iron stomach. We have a 7-year-old son, Max, who believes sales are just dogs on vacation. I run a small e-commerce operation out of a converted garage off Washington Avenue, and when orders are slow I pick up home arena punch lists for realtors' patchwork stuff. Backsplash tile, awkward closet shelves. The house smells like coffee and drywall dust, and our mornings had a rhythm of clattering cereal bowls and someone yelling that their lunch was under the cat. Money had been tight but not catastrophic. My dad's colon surgery last spring bled through our buffer faster than we'd planned, and then the Subaru's head gasket went, and the property tax reassessment was a joke without a punchline. We made lists, we cancelled subscriptions. We removed 2 streaming services that no one admitted to watching. I cut corners at the shop where purpose shipping fell, and learned which days Hannaford marked down the rotisserie chickens. It felt like we were paddling hard in a shallow river, bumping rocks but moving forward. Lena's schedule drifted from predictable to opaque around then. She swapped nights, picked up doubles, and texted that she'd sleep at a co-worker's to avoid waking us when a shift ended at 4 a.m. I tried to be grateful every bit of overtime helped, but the stories had edges that didn't line up. A scrub started smelling like an expensive citrus I'd never seen in the bathroom, a clean, carved smell, like hotel lobby air pretending it had a soul. The mileage on the Subaru crept up beyond any plausible commute. A purple umbrella appeared in our coat rack that none of us had bought. When I asked gentle questions, I got gentle explanations: footage shifts, storms on the bridge, understaffed units, a spur-of-the-moment breakfast with a coworker I'd never heard of. She painted pictures of tense rooms and blinking machines that I couldn't challenge without being cruel, and I let the parts that didn't fit slide into a drawer labelled later. It didn't feel like a lie then. It felt like a choice to believe the person I loved when the alternative was staring down the kind of fight that blows paint off the walls. Our neighbour across the hall, a retired art teacher named Mira, started leaving notes for Max about an osprey nest down by the Eastern Prom. She was the kind of person the building revolved around without realizing it. On more than one early morning, she'd hand me a manila envelope of his drawings he'd forgotten at her place and mentioned seeing a car idling outside our stoop in the small hours. She'd tilt her head like a bird catching a second sound, then back away with a smile that didn't quite land. I told myself I was paranoid. Then I told myself I was tired. Then I told myself nothing at all. Bank alert shattered that quiet story. The PDF was clean and official, the digital trail precise. It said the HELOC had been opened 2 months earlier, securitized against our duplex. Credit line of $75,000, initial draw now of $30,000. I opened my saved folder for mortgage docs and scrolled back. There it was, a welcome packet from Town and Country Federal Credit Union routed to a secondary email address I didn't recognize. The messages neatly archived under a filter call bills. The line item showed a branch visit on a Wednesday I distinctly remembered being at Max's parent-teacher conference. The signature on the application replicated my look but fattened it, like someone had traced me with a too bold pen. My first thought was that we'd been hacked. My second thought was uglier and had a face. I padded into the living room so my panic wouldn't wake Max. The UFI camera LED above the door blinked like a tiny heartbeat. I thumbed through notifications and froze on a clip from 2:43 a.m. the week before, a figure in a lemon yellow raincoat on our stoop. Hood up, hands deep in pockets, standing still for a beat too long. The lens caught the side of a face when the hood shifted to sharp chin. Dark hair, then the person turned and walked away without ringing. There was no reason Lena would be home right then. She had texted at midnight that she'd bonked at the hospital because of a code. The clip had tags. Person detected 2:43 a.m. Good quality. That morning, my coffee tasted like metal. Max asked why my screen asked me to verify my identity so many times, and I told him growing up things were glitchy. It was a joke, and he looked at me the way kids look when they hear a piece of truth they wouldn't name yet. I walked him to Longfellow and waved too long at the corner of Congress and Franklin, then kept walking. The harbour smelled like salt and old rope. I stared at the shipyard hangar and built a list in my head that scared me with its calm. Call the bank, reset passwords, check HL loan swaps, pull credit reports, check mail for paper I'd missed, ask Mira about the idling car. Write it down, make it procedural, so I didn't float off in the part of my brain that wanted to either scream or sleep for 7 years. Town and Country's fraud line routed me to a woman who sounded like a math teacher. She told me the application had required a notarized signature, and then paused like a hand outstretched for the obvious question. She confirmed the notary's name and the branch address on Forest Avenue, and I wrote those down. She said there had been an in-branch visit, verified identities, and a call later that day to confirm access. She recited the device fingerprint that had authorized the draw at 3:17, our router, our IP, our open refrigerator humming just behind me, like the house itself was involved. I opened our shared calendar. The day of the HELOC opening was marked with a sticker of a tiny stethoscope and the words "double at mercy." I scrolled my texts and found a photo from Lena at 6:38 p.m., a tired selfie in a mask with her eyes smiling, time stamped with the hospital's location tag. Something downshifted in me, from fear into a kind of cold resolve that felt like biting foil. I went to Mercy's parking garage on Fore River and sat in the Subaru, watching the entrance where nurses swiped in. I wasn't hunting for a scene, I was searching for a map. I texted the one person I thought might confirm a fact without gilding it, my cousin Chelsea, who worked in scheduling for a different unit and didn't owe either of us anything. I told her I was worried about the payroll issue, that I needed to make sure ours we were counting on had actually been paid. She texted back that she couldn't see other unit specifics, but she could tell me if a swap had been registered or if a particular badge had pinged the doors. She sent a screenshot showing no badge activity for Lena on the night the HELOC was opened, and a registered swap that covered a block of hours. The registered swap listed a coworker named Rowan as the covering nurse. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel and understood how simple and unspectacular betrayal looks on a calendar. There aren't violins. There's a gap where a habit should be and an explanation placed over it like a napkin over a stain. I messaged the fraud department again, opened a supplemental case, and they gave me a number I typed on a sticky note and stuck to the steering wheel. TCFCU-141-2068. Back at the duplex, a letter lay on the doormat on stationery that didn't match anything we owned. It was from Harbor Hearth Apartments on Commercial Street, addressed to a tenant with our address down as a billing contact. My name had been written in a familiar loop in the little box that said responsible party. The content was bland reminders about key fobs and trashes, but the letter had told a different story. I googled the building. The website showed photos of clean hallways and a gym with a blue ocean box by glass. The rent was more than our mortgage. I sat down and counted the separate streams of truth and realized they formed a river. The HELOC provided money. The registered swap provided time. The Harbor Apartments provided a destination. The ring cam provided an entrance, and my stupid belief provided cover. I needed to anchor all of this in something that would force the reality out of the shadows. There was a Sunday dinner planned with Lena's family, her mom's birthday, at a place in Bayside that specialized in clam cakes and cheerfully loud birthdays. I decided to use that as a fulcrum. If I presented facts in front of people who believed in family like it was a sport, there would be no room for softening. I printed the HELOC application, the draw notice, the Harbor Hearth letter, and the HR badge screenshot. I slid them into a manila folder like some suburban parody of a courtroom, and I hated myself for the theatre and loved myself for the spine. 2 hours before dinner, I got a ping from Equifax about a new card in my name with a limit that only made sense if someone had shown the bank that we had a line of credit to back it up. I called, kept my voice level, and asked them to freeze every bureau under our names. They walked me through it with a patience that felt like a blanket. I opened a new checking account at a different credit union and moved what I could. I printed the case numbers and placed them on top of the stack in the folder, like they were armor. I wrote, in my own careful letters, a line on a coil notebook. Effective immediately. All joint accounts frozen except the mortgage. Pending review of HELOC. Safe exchange of keys and cards. I practiced not apologizing. At the restaurant, there smelled like fryer oil and birthday candles. We sat at a long table shaped like command. Mac chatted with his cousins about crabs at low tide. Lena kissed her mother, and though I had sworn to myself not to inventory her body for signs, my eyes clocked that her perfume wasn't the one we bought, and there was a new scuff on the back of her heel, an inside outing of leather that looked like someone had stepped wrong on a curb. The waitress came with paper menus and share. I placed the manila folder on the table as if it were a purse. I did not speak, the story did. I laid out the drawn notice, the welcome packet, the device ID matching our router. I placed the Harbor and Hearth letter beside it like a puzzle piece connecting to nothing in the centre, but everything at the edges. I slid the HR screenshot to like a translation. Here's what was supposed to happen, here's what did. I added the case numbers, the Bureau of Freezes, and a typed letter I had written stating that I would be seeking legal consultation on Monday and that, for now, I needed confirmation that our child would be living at our primary address until things were sorted, except for agreed hours I would write down in a shared doc. The table changed temperature. Her mother reached for her water. Her sister made a sound like a fork placed gently down. Lena's reaction was water over rock-smooth denials, shocked eyebrows, plausible explanations layered like sheets of tissue. It was all said with kindness, the cruelty hidden not in words but in the ease of their familiarity. She claimed an error in the bank systems, while the Harbor and Hearth letter was for a coworker who had used our address temporarily, explained the swap as routine. She reminded me of the night she had worked until her bones rattled, of the time she had held a stranger's hand while a machine breathed for them. The words were shaped to make me small for bringing this into a place with balloons and clam cakes. Then Mira, who had shown up late because she had never needed an invitation to family things we did public, stepped up behind my chair. She was not part of our party, but she had recognized Max's laugh and wandered over. She touched my shoulder and said she'd kept something because she was a person who kept things. She lifted a key fob from her pocket on a red ribbon, the kind Harbor and Hearth issued, and that she said she had found in our share of laundry last week in a pair of blue joggers that had come through with our load. She had meant to put it on the entry table and then felt weird about it. She said she had noticed Lena's car idling under our stoop on 2 nights around 2 a.m., windows fogged, a second silhouette in the passenger seat both times, and the only reason she knew is that she sleeps badly and watches the street when she can't. The table's air went heavy. I looked at the fob. It was unremarkable, grey plastic with a little number 4. I put it next to the letter as if they were magnets. The waitress, bless her, arrived with a cake that said happy birthday and slid it off as if this were any other family with any other secret bruises. I felt the precise, neutral kindness of a stranger offered to people practicing not falling apart in a room designed for joy. Lena's father cleared his throat and asked me to take a breath, that these things could be misunderstandings, that family was complicated, that money changed people. He meant it well, and I loved him for it even while I pulled a printed copy of a credit card statement from my manila pocket, because kindness can't be the court when someone is dismantling your roof with a smile. The statement listed purchases at a hardware store on Marginal Way for lock cylinders, a new brew seat at 2:51 a.m. to Commercial Street, several charges from a place called Bricks and Be Wine Bar I'd never been to, and a bill from an urgent care for a wrist x-ray for someone coded under our plan who wasn't me or Max. There was also an invoice number for a locksmith service out by the old port with a note that the technician had met the client at the service entrance. I placed the papers where the cake plates were supposed to go. Lena's face arranged itself into indignation so beautiful it could have sold expensive candles. She said words about collateral, about co-signing for someone's temporary need, about how my suspicious mind had been poisoned by stress and debt. She made her voice quiet and told me this conversation should not be happening here, that I was making her feel unsafe. She positioned herself behind a kind of shield of tone that would make any decent person step back. For a second, I almost did. Then my phone vibrated with a new email. It was from our pediatrician's portal. Max had gone in that week for a strep test. The portal auto-populated blood typed when insurance data changed, and we changed carriers after the HELOC because it had made premiums cheaper. It listed Max's blood type as O, mine as AB, Lena's as B. Something about those letters did math in my head without permission. I am not a geneticist, but I can read. The portal suggested a question that had nothing to do with secrets and everything to do with the fact of biology that lives in print no matter how badly you wish it wouldn't. I did not show that one at the table. I put my phone face down, because there are truths even a righteous person will not sling like a grenade in a room where a child can see the shrapnel. I did, however, write a note on the coil pad that sat under my hand, request paternity test, not as punishment but as compass. I underlined it. My hand shook less than I would have expected. My mind was going both 5 miles an hour and 300. The next day, I visited Harbor Hearth with a fob on the red ribbon. I told the desk I was there to drop a package for a tenant I did not know, because sometimes lying is just bending reality enough to coax out the truth you can't get otherwise. The person behind the desk smiled like they'd been trained in a place with warm weather and asked me what unit. I showed the fob and the letter, and they nodded without looking too hard. They told me number 403 and handed me a little clipboard to write my name and number. I wrote a fake last name, an emergency contact number that bounced to an app on my phone, and waited for the slow elevator with brown scuffs up the side. Unit 403 smelled like grapefruit and static. The fob unlocked it without complaint. Inside, the apartment looked like an ad for starting over. White sofa too new to stain, plants that didn't droop, a performing coffee table book, and a blanket folded to show its expensive corner tag. In the bathroom, a second toothbrush. In the bedroom, a laundry basket with the nurse's ID badge clipped to a sports bra. On the desk, a small, flat black phone without a case charging on a short cord. The phone wasn't locked. Who leaves a second phone unlocked? People who want to be found by the wrong person at exactly the wrong time, apparently. The texts were quiet, banal, devastating. They were not explicit in a way that would wreck me with images. They were precise in a way that wrecked me with care. Notes about which nights were free. Grocery list that included brand new inside jokes about cereal. A Venmo request for rent with a little house emoji, split in a way that assumed equality. Several screenshots of shift swaps at Mercy with Ron's name repeated like a math problem's answer. A photo taken from the Harbor Hearth gym of the water looking stubbornly blue on a grey day. Something in me dropped the idea that this was a short-term flail. It was a life being trialed without me, with my credit, and my name quietly underwriting Love Lake Finance underwrites dreams. I opened the freezer to ground myself and saw bags of frozen blueberries and lobster ravioli. A note on the fridge magnet read Thursday's bins. It felt like seeing your own handwriting on a different hand. I didn't trash anything. I didn't leave a note. I took 2 photographs, the badge on the sports bra, and the page of the planner open to a week in which my name appeared once in the corner with a drawn star beside Max's spelling test. Every other square filled with appointments and initials I did not recognize. I left the apartment the way you leave a church when you've admitted you don't know how prayer works. That afternoon, I met a lawyer in an office above a bakery on Exchange Street. The waiting room smelled like cinnamon and obligation. Her name was Shrin. She listened the way a mechanic who has seen every noise listens to a description of a rattle. She made a list down the right-hand side of a legal pad. Open separate account done. Credit freeze done. HELOC fraud case pending. Paternity test deeply unfortunate but strategically sound. Temporary custody schedule necessary immediately. In writing. She told me to get a therapist as if she were reminding me to drink water. She assigned each item a case number as we went because bureaucracy is nothing but paper and numbers and the people who make them live. I left her office with a folder thicker than the one I had brought, and a sense that the world had shifted angles but remained square. I took the long way home past Back Cove, the geese honking like they were scoring someone else's drama. On the trail, I ran into Mira with a thermos and a hat with little ears that made her look deliberate and kind. She told me she had an appointment to get her left hip looked and asked after Max with the seriousness of a teacher. She also said she had remembered something else 2 weeks ago, around 3 a.m. She had heard footsteps on our stairs and then voices. She reminded me in that careful, non-judgmental way that she had once taught teenagers with impossible faces how to mix turquoise, and that she could tell when someone thought they were cleverly not being told something. She wanted me to know she had heard 2 people on the other side of our door. Independent witness, heart beating as loud as any stamp. I filed a police report about the forged signature. The officer wrote it up like a grocery list and gave me a number, PPD-25-3882. He did not treat me like I was hysterical or petty. He treated me like a person filing a wretchedly common kind of report. I filed a report with the bank's fraud department with actual paper, an artifact in an age where everything floats. The notary at the bank turned out to be a woman named Dodry who remembered Lena, remembered me by description, remembered a day of rain with a yellow coat left on the chair. She answered questions I didn't ask by saying she was required to confirm my identity and that she did. She also, quietly, said she hoped we figured it out and that she was sorry for what looked like a thing she had been technical about. That night, I emailed Lena a letter that laid out boundaries like boards on a deck, moving all household expenses to the new account, mortgage to be auto-paid from the joint until we resolved the HELOC. No new debt, keys to be exchanged for a set that matched only our address, a temporary schedule from Max. I wrote that I was requesting a paternity test and that I would not discuss it in front of him or through text, only through the lawyer, and that I was doing this not to hurt her but to stop my own mind from running in circles. I wrote that if she had a separate residence, that was her decision, but our son would sleep in his bed at home unless we had a written plan. I wrote that any money drawn from the HELOC without my consent would be treated as theft, and I attached the case numbers like prayer beads. She wrote back with fury shaped like reason. She accused me of controlling behavior, of financial abuse, of making her feel unsafe. She said that a paternity test was an assault. She said I had broken her trust by invading her privacy. She used words she knew would land like knives in a courtroom. I sat at our kitchen table and wondered if edits of the truth count as lies or if they are a more dangerous thing entirely. Then I saved the email and forwarded it to Trin because I will not be coached into fighting on someone else's field. 2 mornings later, a man in a navy peacoat knocked on our door and introduced himself as a property manager from Harbor Hearth. He politely asked to speak with the responsible party for Unit 403, and when I blinked, he clarified that there had been a policy violation regarding subleases. He was the kind of polite that assumes money sorts things out. I told him the responsible party would be joining us by council and handed him Trin's card. He frowned the way people frown when their day just grew a layer. He also handed me a piece of paper with dates and fees and a note about a lock change scheduled for Friday if the balance remained unpaid. The amount lined up suspiciously well with the HELOC draw. I walked to the Harbor Hearth garage and watched people slide into cars that smelled like new leather and continuity. A silver truck pulled up to the service entrance and a man climbed out with a toolbox and showed his leg doors. He loaded a dolly with a box labelled personal items. I recognized the stethoscope neck cradle peeking out. The man met eyes with a woman I had never seen, a brisk office manager type, and they gave each other the look of people who tidy messes for a living. Then I watched Rowan walk out of the service entrance in a hoodie, hood up, looked down as if the paved ground deserved attention, and disappear into a rideshare that had been waiting. Back home, I made pasta for Max and we watched birds dive off the pace sing-song on YouTube because the algorithm likes consistency. After he fell asleep, I pulled the manila folder out again and added the new things to the stack so that the story of my life had a thickness I could measure. I placed the Harbor Hearth fee letter on top and wrote the number of customer service at the corner because I have learned that the way through this kind of assessment is to keep the people in the front office from thinking I am the kind of person who will scream. I am the kind of person who will list facts until the person across from me sees a shape they can act on. Max's school called the next day because he had told his art teacher that money had numbers that got mad. The teacher, in the way of people who deal with both paper and children, suggested we keep routine steady and communicate changes to pick up in writing. In the afternoon, I wrote a custody draft on a Google Doc and shared it with Lena. It included every hour of a week like a set of dance steps, and I wrote it with the love of a person for whom boredom is security. My phone pinged. Lena had added a comment about swapping next Thursday, and then another that she had a conference on Saturday that would take all day. The comments were precise. I know how to read the difference between precise and honest now. That evening, Trin called to say the bank had flagged the notarized signature as potentially out of pattern and had opened an internal review. She told me there was likely video from the branch and that we could subpoena it if necessary. She asked me how I was sleeping. I told her the truth. Like a person learning to sleep in a new house he never moved into, counting the hums and clicks and labelling them safe. 2 days later, a white envelope from the state arrived addressed to both of us and automatic code it triggered when a HELOC was used to fund certain types of purchases. The form politely asked us to confirm that funds had not been used for illegal activity. It was absurd, like asking a person mid-heart attack if they had exercised recently. It did, however, provide a narrative gift the transaction codes. The codes matched a large cashier's check to Harbor Hearth and several smaller payments to contractors loaded as repairs and furnishings. It was all documented in the exact way a person who believes in their new life documents things. There was no sloppiness in the span, the sloppiness lived elsewhere. When we sat down with a mediator at the courthouse, the beige machine of families and viewing and were making arrangements, Lena's face was polished grief. She talked about how hard she had worked, how much pressure she felt, how guilty she felt about stepping away from her vows to herself. She spoke about meeting someone at work who made it feel possible to be a person without a past for a few hours a week. She admitted to opening the apartment in a way that sounded almost administrative, like renewing a license. She framed the HELOC as a stopgap in a season of bad choices. She did not admit to forging my signature, and the mediator did not ask because this part of the process was designed to stop bleeding, not identify the knife. We walked out with a temporary custody agreement and a calendar that told the story of a boy who would not be allowed to feel his world had shattered, whose evenings were carved into gentle blocks of homework, dinner, bedtime reading, and I clung to that like scripture. We also left with a list of items to keep separate, a suggestion to split tax refunds in a particular ratio that made my throat taste like pennies, and a day for a paternity test that we would both attend because the law honours rituals. On the day of the tests, the waiting room was less dramatic than my nightmares. A nurse with tired eyes swabbed cheeks and label tubes. No one asked us to sit together. No one offered a tissue. In the parking lot afterward, the weather tried to be spring but failed. The wind made me feel like a t-shirt on a line. For a second, I thought about not opening the envelope when it came about living in a world where the story was uncertain but softer. Which is worse, knowing a harsh truth or living with a lonely lie because it lets you keep your pictures on the mantle? Would you demand the test now or wait for the kid's sake? People on the internet argue like that question lives in ideas. In real life, it lives in blood and paper. The envelope arrived a week later. I took it to the Eastern Prom and sat on a bench where you can see tankers look like toys. I opened it. I read the percentages. The paper was unsentimental. It said what it said and then it ended. The numbers drew a line in my life. Max's father is not a question the paper felt any way about. The universe did not shift, geese still honked, a runner still passed. I sat for a long time and realized that love has no idea what math is, and courts have no idea what love is, and only a few of us have to live at the intersection and try not to get crushed. I took the paper to Trin and she nodded as if she had already written 3 different versions of our next steps. She talked about preserving Max's routines and making sure that whatever language we built around his story didn't hand him a weapon to use on himself later. She recommended a child therapist who used sand and toys to tell stories because kids will say the thing true if they have a dinosaur whose job is to fight. She asked me if I wanted to pursue criminal charges or work with the bank to keep it civil. I asked her what made a difference in preventing this from happening to the next person, and she said paper and consequences, not vengeance. We filed a complaint with the notary board, not because I believed she was a villain, but because systems require friction to stop. Mary came over with muffins and no advice. She sat at our table like the mother of the building and asked if Max wanted to draw a bird family where the father didn't match. He drew a cardinal and 2 sparrows and then a giant blue blob that he said was a pond. He said the cardinal loved the sparrows because they were ridiculous and loud. He said the pond kept them safe because it was big and wet. He asked if we could go see the Osprey this weekend, if the weather was brave. The HELOC case moved like a barge, slow, visible, powered by something you don't see. The bank's video showed Lena in a yellow raincoat with the hood down, head damp and defiant, sitting across from the notary. It also showed a man leaning against the wall with a baseball cap pulled down, face turned from the camera. When we requested a better angle, the bank demurred. The fraud investigation concluded that authentication factors were consistent with legitimate access, which is corporate for we are technical, not emotional. My signature was not proven forged beyond the threshold the bank felt like honoring. It meant we negotiated not righteousness, but terms. I sold more wall shelves that month than any other. People in Maine like to pretend the ocean makes their always tidy by osmosis. It doesn't. I built and delivered and kept my hands busy so my mind wouldn't chew itself. On Friday nights, Max and I made pizza with dough from Mikuchi and we watched stupid shows where animals do human jobs. The cat switched allegiances depending on who had the warmest lap. I learned to like quiet enough that it didn't ring. Lena moved officially into 403 and then, when the building asked for a single responsible party, into a smaller place off Cumberland that fit the economy of a life that was no longer cosigned by my denial. There were court dates and signatures, and the slow, bureaucratic kindness of a mediator who believed in checklists like religion. Lena wrote me emails at 3 a.m. Sometimes, the hour where the body tells the truth the mouth won't, asking if someday we could sit down outside of these rooms and talk as people who had built a life that, for a time, had been enough. I wrote her back the next morning with words that were respectful and contained. I did not say what I wanted to, which was that love had not failed us. The stories we told ourselves about the rules we could bend had. Rowan transferred to a different hospital across the bridge. I heard from Chelsea that she had asked to be placed on a unit where nights were stricter. These are the bits of gossip that feel like justice even when they are just drift. Harbor and Hearth were 403 back on the market with new photographs taken at a different angle so the ocean looked closer. I walked by one morning and saw a couple in their 20s peering in at the mailroom like it contained happiness. I hoped, generously and a little bitterly, that they could afford their own messes. Max started second grade with a new backpack that made his shoulders look both too small and suddenly giant. He told me he wanted to try the violin because it sounded like clouds pulling apart. I made a chart on the fridge for practice. On nights when he asked where he had been before he was born, I told him the truth he could hold, that before he was Max, he was an idea both his parents had held in their hands, and that ideas can be as strong as blood if you feed them right. I did not use the paper words. I used the ones we write with dinners and pick-ups and sitting too long on a cold step waiting with a soccer ball. One Saturday, after leaf season had come and gone and the air bit at your lungs when you breathed too fast, I got an email with a subject line that used the word resolution. The bank had decided to restructure the HELOC, assigning the balance to Lena with a rate that made my chest loosen. It wasn't mercy. It was math that finally caught up with our math. Trin called it a win because lawyers know how to count wins in increments. I took Max to the cove with stale bread and we watched girls fight like clowns. I touched the place in my pocket where my phone always lies and didn't check it for a whole hour. The ring cam still sends clips. I have not turned it off. It has captured normal things, a neighbour struggling with a package, a cat doing an impossible contortion, a kid practicing a kickflip at 11 p.m. because the night makes you brave. Every once in a while, around 3:17 a.m., my phone lights in the dark with a system check, and the number on the clock makes me nauseous and then grateful. It is a stupid, arbitrary time, and it is the exact minute I realized my life was a constellation I had mistaken for a single star. I still keep the purple umbrella in the rack by the door. In Portland, you respect rain more than you'd think. Sometimes, when I'm locking up for the night, I look at it the way you look at your hands when you've cut them and they have healed with the new line. The living room glows with the soft, slow pulse of the UFI LED. It looks like a tiny lighthouse for ants. The house breathes in its old way radiators sighing, fridge humming, anchor chain of the life I did not lose completely dragging through the hours. I am not a victim in my own head anymore. I am a person who made a list and followed it when the storm hit. I am also a person who loved someone through a series of small choices that added up to a door. On the nights Max is with me, I go into his room and watch him sleep and feel gratitude so big it makes my teeth hurt. On the nights he's not, I walk down to the Eastern Prom and count boys. There are fewer than you think when you're actually looking. Last week, I opened an old shoebox while I was looking for a tape measure and found a photograph of the three of us at the fair in Freiburg. Max sticky with a day that tasted like smoke and sugar. In the background, if you zoom, there's a yellow coat on a stranger's arm. It could be anyone. It doesn't matter. What matters is the way the light fell that day, the way we had thought it would fall forever, and the way I learned to live with a different light. The phone still does its glow some nights at 3:17 with a calendar reminder I forgot to delete called Dad's surgeon. I leave it. It wakes me just enough to see the ceiling and count the tiny cracks I know by now like a map. The UFI LED blinks its even little pulse. Outside, a gull laughs like it knows a joke about people that we would not think was funny. I breathe, and for a long moment, the house holds me the way only something you fixed yourself can hold you. Then it lets me drift back under, the notification dimming, the blue light fading to the shade the ocean has before dawn, and I decide that is what my life looks like now. Not the punch of discovery, but the soft pressure of staying.